Hello, thanks so much for being here. Hiking the Appalachian Trail was an extraordinary event in my life, and I'm thankful for it. But I sure am glad to be home and glad to be here this afternoon to share the hike with you. Beginning on February 15th, I hiked all of the AT from Springer Mountain in Georgia through 14 states to Mount Katahdin in Maine. That's 2,189.2 miles. And that doesn't include the miles I hiked backwards. Oh yes, 3 times. And hiking backwards is a lot easier to do than you might think. The most common way hikers get turned around is coming out of a shelter in the morning after a hearty breakfast of Pop-Tarts. Shelters are usually located on side trails from 1/10 of a mile up to 1/2 a mile off the trail. So hikers get up, they pack up, they eat up, they hike back to the trail, and they turn the wrong way. But that's not how I did it. The first time I got turned around, it was because I missed a turn, the same turn, twice. The date of the mishap, I think, is interesting. It was Friday the 13th of March. A cold, rainy, drizzly, miserable day. Especially bad day to have to spend 2 extra hours on the trail. But it could have been a lot worse, and it would have been a lot worse had it not been for a gravestone, actually 2 gravestones. I missed a left-hand turn at a T intersection and kept on walking downhill on a nice, even trail. That should have been a clue right there. Didn't I notice the absence of white blazes on the trail? I did, but sometimes blazes are pretty far apart, 1/4 of a mile apart. So I kept going. In part, I was trapped by one of my own rules, which is in for a dime, in for a dollar. I didn't give up until I got to the bottom of the hill, and I saw an orange sign with black letters that said, "No trespassing." So I turned around, I climbed back up the hill, I missed the turn again, and headed right back where I came from. I kept walking until I came to gravestones that I had remembered passing that same morning. Kind of hard to forget gravestones with plastic flowers in the middle of nowhere. Another time, it really wasn't my fault. I came down a slope and the trail just disappeared. Did it go left? Did it go right? Did it go straight ahead? Your guess would have been as good as mine. I walked a little ways this way and a little ways that way and a little ways forward. And you've heard the expression, haven't you, about some people don't know up from down? Well, after a little bit, I didn't know north from south. And then when I found the white blaze, I just took off, heading right back the way I had come. Now, once you're turned around, you can hike halfway back to Georgia without realizing it. Now remember, for the most part, you're hiking through a forest. And I don't know whether you know this or not, but one bunch of trees looks pretty much like another bunch of trees. Lucky for me, within 15 minutes or so, I ran into 2 German hikers I knew, Mother Nature and Between, her 18-year-old son. Between was in front, and I asked him, "Why are you hiking south?" And he said, "I'm not hiking south." I don't know how my 3rd southbound misadventure started, but I'll never forget how it ended. I was hiking alone when I saw a privy right beside the trail. I was surprised, and I was thinking, well, what do you know, another trailside privy? That's only the 2nd one I've seen since I left Georgia. I used one this morning just like that one. The trail is marked with white blazes about 2 inches wide and 6 inches long. The blazes are painted mostly on trees, but sometimes on rocks, on posts standing in the middle of open fields, on bridges, on fences. One is painted on the bottom of a canoe that ferries hikers across the Kennebec River in Maine. I never actually saw it, but they say it's there. While most of the trail is blazed, it's not all blazed. Not by a long shot. Now, Before I say another word about missing blazes or anything else that might be taken as criticism of those people who maintain the trail, let me say this. Bless the hundred of volunteers whose hard work enables the rest of us to enjoy the Appalachian Trail. They cut up and drag away blowdowns, trees that have fallen across the trail. They build walkways and lay planks across swampy areas. They build and repair bridges. They haul rocks and build steps up mountains to prevent erosion. They cut water out of the trail, and they mark the trail with those white blazes I told you about. And for the most part, they do an excellent job. That said, I assure you that the Appalachian Trail is not always well maintained or well marked. It's not unusual to come to an intersection with another trail, and hundreds of trails intersect the AT. And you won't have a clue as to about which way to turn. There's not a blaze in sight. Now, after you've hiked for a few months, you'll figure it out. The easy trail, the one that looks like the trail in the park down the road from your house, that's not the AT. The AT will be the one with slick rocks and exposed roots, and it will be headed uphill. And this sign, I don't know if you can see it, somebody had written on it, when in doubt, the AT always goes up. More than half of all through hikers are in their teens and 20s, and many of them are in transition. A few plan to join the service, the Navy, the Air Force, as soon as their hike's over. Some of them had just graduated from college and are waiting to start graduate school in medicine or law or business. Some had finished college and are not sure what to do next. According to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, which manages the AT, since the 1930s, a total of 15,524 people have through hiked the trail, including about 25 who were age 70 or older. The men and women that I met all hiked at or near the front of the pack. So they had a good time, but they were also serious hikers who could cover a lot of miles in a day when they took a notion. 3 of the men I hiked with in New Hampshire, a fellow named Stiles, another one named Hulk, and the third one named Bruin, hiked all night one night, 40 miles, and then took a 0 the next day at a hostel in Munson, Maine. They didn't have a train to catch. They did it just for fun. The Conservancy estimates that more than 2,500 hikers left Springer Mountain, Georgia last year. That's the southern end of the trail, and these hikers all intended to walk to Maine. Year in and year out, about 1 in 4 make it. According to the Conservancy, about 1/4 drop out before they get to North Carolina, which is less than 80 miles. Another 1/4 quit before they reach Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, which is slightly under halfway, and the other 1/4 drop out up north somewhere before they complete their hike. Most northbound hikers, nobos they're called, start between March 1 and mid-April, and they do it to avoid bad weather. I started on February 15th to avoid the hikers who started between March 1 and mid-April. It was nothing personal. I just didn't want to compete with 2 or 3 dozen hikers for space and shelters that usually held 6 or 8. I chose to go hiking during one of the worst cold spells in the recorded history of mankind. Well, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was the coldest winter in several years. And because of the early start, I was the 31st northbound through hiker to arrive at the Conservancy headquarters in Harper's Ferry, which is 1,022 miles north of Springer. I think I was in the first 3 dozen or so to finish. I wasn't very fast. I did pass some nobos while they were resting up in town or asleep in the shelter, but I only passed 3 on the trail. One of them was legally blind. One of them had something wrong with his knee, and one of them was called Slow Man. When the terrain was favorable and I was desperate for one reason or another to get somewhere, I did do some 20-mile days, and I did do one 30-mile day. I would start early, quit late, not stop much in between. The hikers I met on the trail were by far the best part of the trip. And the trail angels were a close second, strangers that often showed up when we needed them the most. Most of the angels were anonymous. They would leave snacks and drinks in ice boxes near a road at a trailhead. But sometimes they would put these ice boxes on their shoulders and hike into the woods and leave them there in absolutely the middle of nowhere. Gifts like that are called trail magic. I did get to meet several trail angels. On April Fool's Day, California and I ran into a hiker named Low Gear who was hiking south. We, of course, were hiking north. And we talked to him a few minutes, and he decided to turn around and walk back with us to a place called Dickey's Gap, and then give us a ride into Troutdale, Virginia, to a hostel. When we settled in, he took us to a restaurant 4 or 5 miles down the road and waited until we were finished eating. Then he took us back to the hostel. On the outskirts of New Hanover, New Hampshire, I was standing on the shoulder of the road eating snacks that a trail angel had left in a box in front of her house, when the trail angel herself, Betsy Mailson, came out and offered to fix me some breakfast. It was good. Friends invited me into their home and treated me royally, rescuing me from a winter storm on one occasion and from illness on another. One of them, Tim Peake, who lives with his wife Meg in Killington, Vermont, baked me a coconut cake for my 73rd birthday. 3 angels who had read my blog decided to help me, and of course, any other hiker who happened to be nearby. When I got to Port Clinton, Pennsylvania, Iceman was waiting for me when I came off the mountain. He took me to supper at a Cracker Barrel, then took me to his home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, about an hour away, where I got cleaned up and got a good night's sleep. And then he tracked me down 2 more times, once in Maine when I was almost out of food, in which he brought me food. Vicki took a day off from work, drove to Harper's Ferry to retrieve a girdle that I was using to keep my insides inside, and returned it to me. I left it in a restroom at the Conservancy headquarters. From Harper's Ferry, she drove north until she got ahead of me, parked her car, and then hiked south on the trail until she found me. Hydro parked his pickup on Main 17 near Quasick, Maine, and waited in the rain at the trailhead where he thought I might just show up. He was right, and when he saw me, he emerged from the woods. When he saw me come out of the woods, he came to me and said, "Would you like to have a ride into Rangeley, Maine?" Boy, was I glad to see him. I had already decided, my knee was hurt, and I'd already decided to leave the trail that morning. I didn't know how I was going to get into Rangeley, and there Hydro was waiting for me at the very spot I was going to leave.